If every expert gives you the same name, maybe the problem was never the man they fired. At exactly 4:37 on a chilly Monday morning, the first emergency call reached Falcon Meridian Aerospace from Seattle. A Gulfstream business jet refused to start. Within 6 minutes, another call came from Denver, then Atlanta, then Phoenix. Before sunrise painted the skies above America, 25 private jets belonging to the company's executive fleet had failed at 25 different airports. Each aircraft displayed a different warning. Each maintenance crew reported a different symptom. Yet every grounded jet meant delayed executives, canceled contracts, and millions of dollars disappearing by the hour. Inside Falcon Meridian's operations center in Dallas, enormous digital maps flashed red from coast to coast as engineers rushed between workstations carrying laptops, maintenance reports, and satellite communications. Voices overlapped until the room sounded more like an emergency command center than a corporate headquarters. Emily Morgan walked through the glass doors wearing a tailored white blazer, her calm expression refusing to reveal the pressure resting on her shoulders. At only 32 years old, she had become one of the youngest chief executive officers in the aviation industry, earning a reputation for making impossible decisions under impossible deadlines. This morning felt different. The crisis was spreading faster than anyone could explain. "Status," Emily said without raising her voice. The room became quiet. The director of flight operations stepped forward. 25 aircraft are grounded across 11 states. Another executive added, "No common failure has been identified." A senior engineer shook his head. "We have teams inspecting every system." Emily studied the massive display covering the front wall. 25 blinking red markers stretched across the country like warning lights before a storm. "Call every regional maintenance supervisor," she ordered. "I want every available specialist involved immediately." Phones began ringing across the nation. Minutes later, answers started coming back one after another. "Seattle called first. If you want these aircraft flying today, find Daniel Carter." Denver reported next. "Daniel Carter would know what this is." Atlanta echoed the same response. "We need Daniel Carter." Then Phoenix, Nashville, Charlotte, Salt Lake City, Orlando, Minneapolis. One after another, experienced mechanics who had never spoken to each other gave exactly the same answer. The operations room slowly fell silent. Emily looked around the table, confused by the repeated name. "Who is Daniel Carter?" No one answered immediately. Finally, an older engineering manager removed his glasses and sighed. "He used to be our best systems engineer." Emily frowned. "Used to?" The man hesitated before continuing. "He was let go several years ago." Another executive quietly added, "Most of the maintenance procedures we still use were originally developed while he worked here." Emily crossed her arms. "Then why is he not sitting in this building right now?" No one spoke. The silence grew heavier with every passing second. Outside, another alert appeared on the giant screen. Aircraft number 26 had just reported the same mysterious failure while preparing for departure in Miami. Emily turned back toward the operations team. "I want every personnel file connected to Daniel Carter on my desk within 10 minutes. The older manager lowered his eyes before speaking almost in a whisper. "There is something else you should know." Emily looked directly at him. "What?" He swallowed slowly. Before he was dismissed, Daniel warned the company that one overlooked maintenance policy could eventually ground the entire fleet. Nobody believed him. The operations center remained unusually quiet after the older manager finished speaking. Nobody argued with him because everyone in the room understood he had told the truth. Emily Morgan stood motionless for a moment before opening the thick personnel file that had just been placed in front of her. The first page showed an ordinary employee photograph. Daniel Carter, Senior Aircraft Systems Engineer. 38 years old. Advanced degrees in aerospace engineering. Multiple commendations. More than 40 patented technical improvements. Credited to the company during his career. Emily slowly turned another page. Performance evaluations described him with the same words year after year. Exceptionally precise. Calm under pressure. Trusted by field mechanics. Extraordinary diagnostic ability. Then everything suddenly changed. Near the end of the file appeared a termination notice issued 5 years earlier during a major corporate restructuring. The explanation was surprisingly brief. Position eliminated. Operational realignment. Emily frowned. That cannot be the whole story. The company's legal director quietly answered, "Officially, that is all we documented." Emily looked directly at him. "Officially?" He lowered his eyes. There were disagreements over maintenance policy. Daniel believed one of the revised inspection schedules created unnecessary long-term risk. Leadership believed the changes would reduce costs without affecting safety. Another engineering executive sighed deeply. He argued for weeks. Did anyone prove him wrong? Emily asked. No one answered. She closed the folder slowly. Outside the conference room, phones continued ringing as airport managers demanded answers. Another aircraft had been added to the growing list awaiting repairs. Meanwhile, nearly 30 miles west of downtown Fort Worth, Daniel Carter was completely unaware that his name had become the center of every emergency conversation inside Falcon Meridian Aerospace. His morning followed the same quiet routine it had for years. He finished tightening the final bolt on an old hydraulic pump before wiping his hands with a clean shop towel. Sunlight streamed through the open garage door of his small repair shop, illuminating shelves filled with carefully organized tools, labeled storage bins, and engine components restored instead of discarded. Nothing inside suggested that one of the country's most respected aviation engineers once worked there. Family photographs occupied more wall space than technical awards. Children's drawings hung beside maintenance certificates. A handwritten calendar listed school activities rather than business meetings. "Dad, are you ready?" A cheerful voice called from outside. Daniel smiled immediately. His 10-year-old daughter stepped into the workshop carrying her backpack and lunchbox. "Almost," he replied. "Did you remember your science project?" She proudly lifted a carefully protected model airplane built from recycled materials. "I finished it last night." Daniel examined it with genuine admiration. "Looks like you paid attention to balance." She grinned. "You taught me." He locked the workshop, helped her into the old pickup truck, and they drove toward school beneath the clear Texas sky. Along the way, they passed Falcon Meridian aircraft crossing high overhead, leaving thin white trails that slowly disappeared into the morning light. His daughter looked out the window. "Do you ever miss working on airplanes?" Daniel thought quietly before answering. "I never stopped working on airplanes. I just stopped working for one company." She nodded, satisfied with the answer. Neither of them noticed the black executive sedan turning onto the same road several hundred yards behind them. Inside sat one of Falcon Meridian's senior regional maintenance directors. He had ignored corporate protocol, skipped the emergency conference call, and chosen to search for Daniel himself because after 25 years in aviation, he trusted experience more than office politics. As he watched the old pickup disappear around the next corner, he quietly whispered to himself, "If anyone can save those airplanes today, it is the man we never should have let walk away." By 8:15 that morning, the Emergency Operations Center had transformed into a wall of unanswered questions. Every new report arriving from the field seemed to contradict the last. One aircraft displayed unstable fuel pressure. Another refused to complete its engine synchronization sequence. A third showed intermittent electrical faults that disappeared during testing. Teams at 25 airports believed they were facing 25 separate mechanical failures. Emily Morgan stood before the enormous digital display with her arms folded, listening as specialists debated one theory after another. Replace the pressure regulators. Inspect every control module. Ground the entire fleet for software verification. The room grew louder with every suggestion, yet none of them explained why identical aircraft maintained under identical procedures had suddenly failed within the same 12-hour period. Emily finally raised one hand. Silence returned immediately. "Call Daniel Carter." Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. "He is no longer employed by Falcon Meridian," one vice president reminded her. Emily looked directly at him. "That does not change the fact that every mechanic in this company asked for him before they asked for anyone else." Nearly an hour later, the senior regional maintenance director quietly parked beside Daniel's modest repair shop after dropping Daniel's daughter safely at school. Daniel was already back at his workbench rebuilding a hydraulic actuator for a local farming helicopter. He looked up as the visitor entered. "Good morning, Frank." Frank Dawson smiled with visible relief. "You still remember me." Daniel set down his tools. "You taught me my first field inspection." Frank laughed softly. "Looks like you remember more than I do." After a brief handshake, neither man wasted time pretending the visit was social. Frank carefully placed a thick stack of maintenance reports across the workbench. 25 grounded jets. Daniel glanced at the first page without sitting down. Different airports? Yes. Daniel turned another page. Different maintenance crews? Yes. Another page. Different warning messages? Every single one. Daniel stopped reading after only 4 reports and quietly closed the folder. Frank looked surprised. That is all you need. Daniel nodded. The reports are different. He gently tapped the stack with one finger. The cause is not. Frank stared at him. You are saying 25 failures all come from one problem? Daniel answered calmly. Not one mechanical problem. One maintenance decision. Frank frowned. You have not even inspected an airplane. Daniel walked toward an old wooden shelf and removed a faded binder covered with years of dust. There was no company logo on its cover, only neat handwriting that read personal engineering notes. He slowly opened it to a bookmarked page filled with diagrams, inspection intervals, and handwritten calculations dating back more than 6 years. Daniel pointed to one paragraph. The inspection schedule was shortened here. Frank looked confused. Shortened. Daniel shook his head. Not shortened. Simplified. He looked through the open garage toward the bright Texas sky where another business jet quietly crossed overhead. Someone removed one inspection because they believed it never mattered. Frank studied the handwritten notes before looking back at Daniel with growing disbelief. How could you possibly know they actually changed your procedure? Daniel closed the binder with remarkable calm. Because I wrote the original maintenance protocol. Frank remained speechless. Then Daniel added one sentence that lingered in the quiet workshop long after he spoke it. There is something buried inside those aircraft that nobody has noticed for years, and if I am right, whoever approved that revision has been unknowingly relying on a secret I left behind before I was dismissed. Frank felt a chill despite the warm morning sunlight, because Daniel sounded less like a man making a guess and more like someone remembering a promise that had never been broken. Frank Dawson drove faster than he had in years, gripping the steering wheel with one hand while the faded engineering binder rested carefully on the passenger seat beside him. Daniel Carter had refused to climb into the truck or rush toward corporate headquarters. Take the notes first, he had said with quiet confidence. If they are willing to understand before they are willing to apologize, there is still hope. Less than 40 minutes later, Frank entered Falcon Meridian's Emergency Operations Center carrying the worn binder instead of another stack of failure reports. Conversation stopped as he placed it on the conference table in front of Emily Morgan. She opened the cover and immediately noticed that every page had been handwritten with remarkable precision years before the maintenance policy had ever been revised. Diagrams filled the margins. Testing observations covered entire pages. Every inspection interval included explanations instead of assumptions. One paragraph had been outlined with blue ink. Never eliminate the secondary harmonic resonance inspection, even when statistical models suggest it is unnecessary. Failure will remain invisible until multiple aircraft reach the same accumulated operating window. Emily looked up. This was written before the policy change. Frank nodded. Several years before. The chief engineering officer quickly compared the handwritten notes with the company's current maintenance manual displayed on a large monitor. His expression changed almost immediately. The resonance inspection is gone. Another engineer searched archived revisions. It disappeared during the cost reduction initiative. Someone quietly asked, who approved that revision? No one answered because every executive already knew where the signatures would eventually lead. Emily closed the binder and looked around the room. Prepare one aircraft exactly as Daniel instructed. A maintenance supervisor hesitated. Only one. Emily replied calmly. If he is wrong, we lose 1 hour. If he is right, we save an entire fleet. Within minutes, technicians at Dallas Executive Airport received Daniel's handwritten procedure through a secure engineering channel. Cameras inside the maintenance hangar transmitted every movement back to headquarters. Dozens of engineers watched silently as the local crew reopened an inspection panel that had not been touched in years because the simplified maintenance schedule no longer required it. Nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared broken. One technician almost closed the panel again before another remembered a single handwritten note from Daniel's binder. Check alignment under natural engine resting position, never under hydraulic support. They carefully repositioned the aircraft exactly as instructed. Suddenly, the lead mechanic leaned closer. There it is. A component no larger than a person's thumb had shifted by less than the thickness of a credit card. Under ordinary inspections, it looked perfectly normal. Under Daniel's forgotten procedure, the hidden misalignment became unmistakable. Following his instructions step by step, the technicians completed a minor adjustment that required only a few specialized tools in less than 12 minutes. Everyone inside Falcon Meridian's operations center watched the engine start sequence through the live video feed. The cockpit displays remained green. The engines stabilized smoothly. Every warning message disappeared. Nobody celebrated. Nobody even spoke. Emily slowly exhaled as years of unquestioned assumptions collapsed in front of her eyes. Then another notification appeared on the giant operations screen. A maintenance supervisor in Denver had independently applied Daniel's handwritten procedure after hearing about the Dallas results. Their aircraft had also returned to service. Seconds later, another message arrived from Atlanta, then Seattle, then Phoenix. Green status indicators began replacing red across the digital map, one airport after another, creating a quiet wave of hope stretching across the country. Emily rested one hand on Daniel's weathered binder before noticing something almost hidden beneath the final page. Folded into the back cover was a sealed envelope addressed in careful handwriting to whoever leads this company when this warning finally matters. She stared at it without opening it, unaware that the letter had been waiting for exactly this day. The first aircraft departed Dallas just before noon, climbing smoothly into the bright Texas sky while hundreds of employees inside Falcon Meridian watched its flight path appear on the giant operations display. Nobody applauded. They simply stared as the green icon continued moving without interruption. A second aircraft left Denver 23 minutes later, then Seattle, then Atlanta. The pattern repeated itself across the country with almost unbelievable consistency. Every maintenance team that followed Daniel Carter's handwritten procedure reported the same result. The mysterious failures vanished. The operations center, which had echoed with confusion only hours earlier, was now filled with a different kind of silence. It was the silence that arrived when certainty replaced pride. Emily Morgan stood before the digital map as one red marker after another turned green until only a handful remained. "How many aircraft are still grounded?" she asked. "4," the operations coordinator answered. Another voice immediately followed. "3 now?" Less than 10 minutes later, the final status update appeared. All 25 aircraft had returned to operational readiness without replacing engines, software, or expensive flight systems. The solution had required careful observation instead of complicated equipment. One veteran mechanic from Charlotte smiled quietly during a live conference call. "We spent years looking at the wrong place because we stopped asking why the original procedure existed." Similar comments arrived from airports across the country. Experienced technicians who had once worked beside Daniel remembered the same habit. He never added a single inspection unless he believed one forgotten detail could someday prevent a much larger problem. Emily listened without interrupting. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she realized the company's greatest asset had never been its aircraft or facilities. It had been the judgment of people whose experience could not be measured on quarterly reports. She picked up the weathered engineering binder once more, slowly turning each page with greater respect than before. The handwriting revealed something beyond technical brilliance. Every note explained how an inspection protected mechanics, pilots, passengers, and future engineers who might never know the author's name. There was no arrogance in the writing, only responsibility. Frank Dawson watched Emily reading and quietly said, "That is exactly who Daniel has always been. He solved problems so other people would never have to know they existed." Emily nodded without looking up. "We dismissed the person who understood our airplanes better than anyone else." Across town, Daniel finished repairing the hydraulic actuator he had been working on before the crisis interrupted everyone except him. He called the customer to say the equipment was ready for pickup, swept the workshop floor, and then glanced at the clock. It was nearly time to pick up his daughter from school. His phone had remained on silent inside a desk drawer all morning. When he finally looked at it, dozens of missed calls and voice messages filled the screen from former coworkers, maintenance supervisors, and unknown corporate numbers. Daniel smiled gently but placed the phone back into the drawer unopened. There was someone more important waiting for him than any executive. As he locked the workshop and headed toward his old pickup truck, he noticed a familiar black executive sedan parked quietly across the street. It was empty now, but resting beneath his windshield wiper was a simple white envelope with no company logo, no return address, and only 6 carefully printed words on the front. It read, "Please read before you say no." Daniel looked at the envelope for several silent seconds before placing it on the passenger seat beside him, unaware that the handwriting matched the signature hidden inside the sealed letter Emily still had not opened. Daniel Carter did not open the envelope immediately. He picked up his daughter from school, listened as she excitedly described her science presentation, stopped at a neighborhood grocery store for fresh fruit and bread, and drove home beneath the warm afternoon sun as though the day had unfolded no differently than hundreds before it. His daughter noticed the white envelope resting on the passenger seat. "Is it important?" she asked. Daniel smiled softly. "If it truly is, it will still be important after dinner." She nodded because she had grown up watching her father place people ahead of problems. Back at Falcon Meridian headquarters, Emily Morgan finally stood alone inside the executive conference room. The emergency had ended, but another decision remained. She carefully removed the sealed letter hidden inside Daniel's engineering binder. The paper had yellowed with age, yet the seal remained unbroken. Written across the front in steady handwriting were the words, "To the leader who chooses truth over convenience." Emily hesitated only briefly before opening it. The first sentence immediately captured her attention. "If you are reading this, then the inspection I fought to preserve has already proven necessary." She continued reading in complete silence. The letter contained no bitterness, no accusations, and no attempt to defend Daniel's reputation. Instead, it explained why every engineering shortcut eventually carried an invisible cost. It described leadership as the courage to protect people who would never know they had been protected. Near the bottom of the final page, one paragraph had been underlined. "Someday another leader will inherit this company. Please do not ask whether my recommendation saves money. Ask whether it allows every mechanic to sleep peacefully knowing every passenger arrived home safely." Emily slowly lowered the letter. The room felt strangely still. She had expected anger from a man who had been dismissed despite years of extraordinary service. Instead, she had discovered grace. Frank Dawson quietly entered without knocking. "Did you finish reading it?" Emily nodded. "I have never seen someone prepare forgiveness before injustice even happened." Frank smiled sadly. "That sounds exactly like Daniel." Emily looked back toward the binder. "Who wrote the envelope left on his truck today?" Frank paused before answering. "Not me." Emily frowned. "Then who knew where to find him?" Frank thought carefully. Very few people knew he still kept that workshop. Across town, after dinner dishes had been washed and homework completed, Daniel finally sat alone on the front porch while the evening breeze drifted through the oak trees surrounding his modest home. He opened the plain white envelope and unfolded a single handwritten page. There was no signature at the top, only one familiar sentence. "You were right, and I never found the courage to admit it while I still had the authority to do so." Daniel quietly continued reading. The letter came from the executive who had approved the maintenance revision years earlier. It explained that financial pressure from investors had influenced decisions that should have remained purely technical. The writer confessed that Daniel had never lost the engineering debate. Leadership had simply chosen the cheaper answer. At the bottom appeared one final request. "I kept another document hidden because I believed someone worthy would eventually need it more than I did. It belongs to you now." Taped to the back of the page was a small brass key with a faded paper tag attached. In careful handwriting, the tag read, "Archive Cabinet B, Executive Records Room." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment, recognizing the handwriting immediately. The man who had written both letters had passed away 3 years earlier, which meant someone had preserved his final confession until the exact day the truth could no longer be ignored. The following morning, Falcon Meridian Aerospace felt strangely different. The crisis had ended. Every aircraft had returned safely to service, yet nobody inside the headquarters celebrated. Instead, conversations drifted toward one subject that spreadsheets and executive meetings had ignored for years: Daniel Carter. Mechanics who had worked beside him began sharing stories that younger employees had never heard. One technician remembered how Daniel once spent an entire weekend redesigning a small inspection tool because he believed it could save future mechanics several hours every month. Another recalled that Daniel never signed his own engineering suggestions, preferring the entire maintenance team to receive credit instead. Piece by piece, a forgotten reputation quietly returned to life without Daniel saying a single word on his own behalf. Emily Morgan listened to every story. None sounded exaggerated. In fact, each one explained why experienced mechanics had trusted Daniel before they trusted official manuals. Later that morning, Emily requested access to Executive Records Room B. The aging records manager looked surprised when she presented the small brass key. "I have not seen that key in years," he admitted. Together, they walked into a climate-controlled archive where rows of locked filing cabinets preserved decades of company history. Cabinet B opened with a gentle click. Inside rested only one leather portfolio marked with Daniel's employee identification number. Emily carefully placed it on a large wooden table and opened the cover. The first document immediately caught her attention. It was not a disciplinary report. It was a recommendation for promotion, signed nearly 6 years earlier. It proposed creating an entirely new position specifically for Daniel, Chief Engineering Integrity Officer. The accompanying memorandum explained that Daniel possessed an unusual combination of technical brilliance, moral judgment, and practical leadership that could shape the company's future for decades. Emily slowly turned another page. The proposal had received enthusiastic support from engineering leadership. Then she reached the final page. Across the bottom, stamped in bold red letters, appeared a single word: "Cancelled." No explanation followed. Instead, another folded note rested beneath the recommendation. It had been written by the same executive whose confession Daniel had received the night before. "I canceled this promotion because I believed investors demanded immediate savings. I now understand that the most expensive mistake a company can make is removing the person who protects everyone else from invisible risks." Emily quietly closed her eyes. She realized Daniel had never been dismissed because he lacked ability. He had been dismissed because integrity had become inconvenient. Across town, Daniel unlocked his workshop as he always did before sunrise. He swept the floor, organized his tools, and prepared for another ordinary day. Before beginning work, he opened the leather folder containing the documents he had brought home after visiting the archives early that morning. Hidden inside was something he had never expected to find. It was the unsigned draft of a national aviation safety proposal written nearly 7 years earlier. Every recommendation matched inspection standards that had gradually spread throughout the industry, protecting thousands of aircraft far beyond Falcon Meridian. Yet nowhere did the document identify its original author. Daniel smiled quietly, not with disappointment, but with relief that the ideas had survived even if the recognition had not. Just then, a black sedan slowly pulled into the parking lot. Emily stepped out carrying the weathered engineering binder against her chest. She walked toward the workshop without security, without attorneys, and without a single executive beside her. When Daniel opened the door, neither of them spoke immediately. Emily simply held out the binder with both hands, as though returning something far more valuable than paper. Then, with unmistakable sincerity, she said, "I did not come to ask you to fix another airplane. I came because I believe there is one final truth that belongs to you, and I think it is capable of changing far more than our company." Daniel Carter accepted the weathered engineering binder with both hands, not because it belonged to him, but because he had always believed that knowledge carried responsibility long after recognition disappeared. Emily Morgan stood quietly inside the modest workshop, surrounded by carefully arranged tools that reflected years of patience rather than profit. There were no luxury displays, no trophies placed where visitors could admire them, only family photographs, handwritten maintenance notes, and a small wooden shelf filled with model airplanes that Daniel and his daughter had built together over the years. Emily slowly looked around the room before speaking. "Every executive office I have ever entered tried to impress people. This place reminds people why work matters." Daniel smiled gently. "Machines are only part of the job. People are always the reason." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment before placing another document on the workbench. "Yesterday, I thought our company needed its best engineer back. Today, I understand it needs its conscience back." Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, He opened the binder to the final section where several pages had never been officially filed. Between them rested a handwritten engineering journal that neither of them had noticed before. The first page carried no title, only a date from nearly 8 years earlier. Daniel quietly read a few lines before stopping. He recognized his own handwriting, but he did not remember placing those pages inside the binder. Emily watched him carefully. "What is it?" Daniel turned another page. "These are personal development notes. I wrote them while designing new inspection methods." Emily noticed that the journal contained almost no technical formulas. Instead, each page described why certain procedures existed and which future failures they might quietly prevent. One sentence caught her attention. "The safest system is the one that protects people before they realize they are in danger." She whispered the words aloud. "That sounds less like engineering and more like a promise." Daniel nodded softly. "The best engineering always begins with a promise." As they continued reading, another folded document slipped onto the workbench. Unlike the previous letters, this one carried the official seal of the Federal Aviation Administration but had never been mailed. Emily carefully unfolded it. It was a recommendation submitted years earlier asking federal regulators to adopt Daniel's inspection methodology as a national voluntary safety standard. Attached beneath it were letters from mechanics representing dozens of airlines across the country, each describing how Daniel's ideas had quietly prevented expensive failures without attracting public attention. None of those letters had ever reached Daniel because they had remained locked inside the executive archives after his dismissal. Emily looked at him with genuine disbelief. "People all over the industry respected your work, and you never knew." Daniel gently placed the letters back into the binder. "Knowing would not have changed why I wrote them." The quiet simplicity of his answer lingered inside the workshop far longer than either of them expected. At that very moment, Emily's phone began receiving messages from aviation companies across the country. News of the fleet recovery had spread faster than anyone anticipated. Maintenance directors wanted copies of Daniel's restored inspection procedure. Engineering schools requested permission to teach the case as an example of ethical leadership. Several airline executives asked whether Falcon Meridian intended to publish the original engineering documentation. Emily looked up from the growing list of requests and then back at Daniel. "Without saying a single public word, you have started changing an entire industry." Daniel walked toward the workshop window where afternoon sunlight reflected across the hood of his old pickup truck. He quietly replied, "Industries change when ordinary people decide that doing the right thing is more important than being remembered for it." Neither of them noticed a small notation written in the margin of the final journal page, almost hidden beneath years of faded ink. It contained the registration number of one specific aircraft followed by 6 handwritten words. "Never remove the original inspection archive copy." The number matched the company's oldest executive jet, an airplane that had remained untouched inside Falcon Meridian's private museum for nearly a decade, waiting silently to reveal the final piece of Daniel's forgotten legacy. 3 days later, Falcon Meridian Aerospace invited maintenance leaders, engineers, flight crews, and aviation executives from across the country to gather inside the company's historic aircraft museum outside Dallas. Emily Morgan insisted that the event would not celebrate a successful recovery. It would correct a forgotten truth. Daniel Carter almost declined the invitation, but his daughter quietly placed a hand on his arm before they left home that morning. "Sometimes people need to say thank you," she told him. "Maybe this is for them more than it is for you." Daniel smiled and agreed. As they entered the museum, conversations gradually faded until the room became almost completely silent. Many of the mechanics who had spoken Daniel's name during the crisis stepped forward one after another, shaking his hand with quiet respect. None offered dramatic speeches. None attempted to excuse the past. Their gratitude felt genuine because it came from people who understood exactly what his work had protected. Emily welcomed everyone before walking toward the company's oldest executive jet, the same aircraft whose registration number had appeared inside Daniel's forgotten journal. The airplane had not flown in nearly 10 years and had remained preserved exactly as it had completed its final flight. "Daniel," Emily said softly, "you asked us never to remove the original inspection archive from this aircraft." Daniel looked surprised. "I wrote that because I believed nobody would ever look for it." Emily nodded. "Today we did." A museum technician carefully opened a small maintenance compartment hidden behind an interior service panel that had remained sealed since the aircraft entered retirement. Inside rested a weatherproof metal container secured with two original factory fasteners. The technician carefully lifted it out and placed it on a nearby table. Daniel immediately recognized the container. I installed that before the aircraft entered service. Emily looked at him with curiosity. What is inside? Daniel slowly opened the lid. Instead of spare parts or technical drawings, the container held a complete handwritten engineering archive describing every inspection philosophy, every safety principle, and every design decision that had guided his work. Tucked beneath the final notebook rested one last sealed envelope addressed simply, "Open only if the future needs proof." Emily gently handed it to Daniel. He broke the aging seal and unfolded a single page. The handwriting belonged to the former executive whose letters had already changed everything. Daniel read silently for several moments before looking toward the audience. "He wrote this on the day I was dismissed." Emily quietly asked, "What does it say?" Daniel took a slow breath before answering. "It says he never accepted my termination." Confused murmurs spread through the room until Daniel continued reading. "He secretly transferred ownership of every engineering patent I created back into my name before he passed away because he believed the truth would eventually matter more than corporate pride." Complete silence filled the museum. Emily stood motionless as the company's legal counsel stepped forward, holding another folder retrieved from the archive only that morning. He confirmed every word. The patents that had quietly shaped inspection standards across the aviation industry had legally belonged to Daniel for years without anyone realizing it, including Daniel himself. The room remained silent not because of the value those patents now represented, but because everyone suddenly understood that the quiet single father they had once overlooked had never lost what truly mattered. His dignity had survived every misunderstanding. His grace had outlasted every mistake. And the legacy that protected countless passengers had carried his name all along, waiting patiently for the day when truth finally found the courage to introduce itself.